Hi everybody, this is a video produced by the Bible Project. I'll put a link below. We just swapped out the narration from American accents to British accents, but all credit to the Bible Project for producing this.
You've probably heard the word holy before, or at least sang it in a church song once or twice. And for most people, this idea is really just connected to being a morally good person. So God is holy because he's morally perfect.
Yeah, that's part of it. But in the Bible, the idea of holiness is even bigger and more rich. What it's really describing is how God is the creative force behind the whole universe. He's the one and only being with the power to make a world full of such beauty and life. And so all these abilities, they make God utterly unique, which is the meaning of the word holy. So a helpful way to think about God's holiness is by using the sun as a metaphor. The sun is unique, at least within our solar system, and it's really powerful. It's the source of all this beautiful life on our planet. So you could say that the sun is holy. And you can actually take this metaphor even further in that the whole area around the sun is also holy.
Yeah, because the closer you get to the sun, the more intense it gets.
Yes, exactly. So that very power and goodness that generates all this life is also dangerous. I mean, the sun, if you get too close, will annihilate you. And in the same way, there's this paradox at the heart of God's holiness, because if you're impure, his presence is dangerous to you. And not because it's bad, but because it's so good. And so the first time we see this paradox of God's holiness is in the story of Moses and the burning bush.
So God tells Moses to take off his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. And Moses covers his face in fear and God says, "Hey, don't come any closer. It's intense."
Actually, it's that intensity of God's holiness that's explored even more in the stories of Israel's temple, which was the main place where God's holy presence was located. And at the centre of the temple was this room called the Most Holy Place. It's the hotspot of God's presence. And whether you're an Israelite living in the land around the temple or a priest working in the temple itself, you're in proximity to God's holy presence, which is dangerous.
Yeah, that is a problem. So how's it supposed to work?
Well, in the Bible, the solution is that you need to become pure.
So like being morally pure.
Yeah, and that's easy enough to understand. But the Bible spends a lot of time talking about another kind of purity, being ritually pure. A state where you separate yourself from anything related to death, like touching things like diseased skin or dead bodies, or even certain bodily fluids. All these things make you impure. And becoming ritually impure isn't necessarily sinful. What's wrong is waltzing into God's presence when you're in an impure state. And so that's why God gave the Israelites very clear instructions for knowing when they were impure and steps to become pure so they could go into the temple again.
So that's what the book of Leviticus is about.
Right, but it doesn't stop there. This idea keeps developing. So later in the scriptures, we find this really interesting story by a prophet named Isaiah. And he has this amazing vision where he's in the temple and he's right in God's presence. And he is totally terrified.
Yeah, he knows the rules. He shouldn't even be in there and he's worried about being destroyed.
And then this crazy creature called a seraphim.
Yeah, that is a crazy creature.
Absolutely. So it flies over with a hot coal and then it sears Isaiah's lips with the coal and says something really strange. Your guilt is taken away and your sin is atoned for.
So this burning coal somehow makes Isaiah pure.
Right, and it's remarkable because normally if you touch something impure, it transfers its impurity to you. But now here's this new idea where you have this coal, this very holy and pure object, and it touches Isaiah and it transfers its purity to him. Isaiah is not destroyed by God's holiness, he's transformed by it. And the implications of this are absolutely huge. But there's one more development, this time from another prophet, Ezekiel, and he has this vision where he's standing at the temple and he sees water trickling from it. And then that water turns into a stream, and then it grows into a deep river that starts flowing through the desert, leaving this trail of green trees behind it, and then it flows into the Dead Sea, making everything fresh and alive.
So instead of becoming pure and then going to the temple, here God's holiness comes out from the temple, making things pure and bringing them to life. But what does it all mean?
We don't know until we meet this man Jesus, and he claims that he is fulfilling all of these visions, but in surprising new ways. So Jesus went around touching people who were impure. People with skin diseases, a woman with chronic bleeding, or dead people. And when he touches them, their impurity should transfer over to Jesus. But instead, Jesus' purity transfers to them and actually heals their bodies.
Jesus is like that holy coal in Isaiah's vision.
Right, and Jesus claimed that he was the human embodiment of God's own holiness, and that he and his followers were now God's temple, so that through them, God's holy presence would go out into the world and bring life and healing and hope. And so this is why Jesus described his followers as having streams of living water flowing out of them.
So this is our part of the story where we find ourselves now, but where's this all heading?
So, the last pages of the Bible end with a final vision about God's holiness. And this time, it's by a man named John. And in his vision, we see the world made completely new. The entire earth has become God's temple. And Ezekiel's river is there, flowing out of God's presence, immersing all of creation, removing all impurity, and bringing everything back to life.